Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for October 12th, 2023. I'm going to be discussing the danger that we are moving into an absolute chaotic world, a Hobbesian universe, in which you have a war of each against all. This is the result of the last 50 years of Western policy, which has moved toward the acceptance of the Hobbesian idea that everyone is fighting against everyone else for their own personal interests, and that you have to have some power at the top, what Hobbes called a Leviathan, to enforce order. And what's that order? Well, it's an order which allows people to scramble for a living, fighting against everyone else, a zero-sum game. And in a modern world with nuclear weapons, it's extremely dangerous. But that's where we are, whether we're talking about the Ukraine situation or the Middle East. Once you give up on the idea of diplomacy, of negotiation, of compromise, of reaching agreements based on higher principles, once you give that up, you're in the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. And that's what we're seeing right now. Now, some of our viewers scoff at the idea that you can have diplomatic solutions or negotiations, preferring apparently instead vengeance as a path toward justice. That is, if you've been wronged, you have a right to strike back. Now, if you assume that justice requires the overturning of unjust policies, is it acceptable for those aspiring to create a more humane world to engage in inhumane practices supposedly to attain it? And if so, all you do is carry out a policy of destroying your enemy as opposed to changing the enemy into someone who can live with you in a potential cooperation and mutual benefit. This is where we are in the world today. This is the Biden universe. This is the Obama universe. This is the British historic policy that goes back to such thinkers in terms of the Southwest Asia as Bernard Lewis, Brzezinski, Samuel Huntington in the Clash of Civilizations. Now, the decision by the Israeli government to respond to Hamas's attack on civilians by imposing a complete siege on the civilian population of Gaza, first of all, that violates international law. Yes, the attack on civilians in Israel by Hamas was criminal, but exacting revenge against innocent people, including children, that's the law of the jungle. And all that will do is increase the anger in that population and the sense of hopelessness, which led to the attack on Israel in the first place. Now, that's the idea of the law of the jungle. The condition of man is permanently a war of each against all. Now, there's still a lot we don't understand and don't know about how Israel was supposedly caught off guard. But the question of collective punishment, of denying food, water, fuel, and medicine to a population of mostly civilians, 2.4 million, that just increases the sense of hopelessness. They've existed in a Warsaw-type ghetto situation for 2 to 3 generations. Are you going to advocate continuing that or making it worse? Well, so where are the voices of reason from Western governments? Well, we've seen this in terms of Ukraine. The unwillingness for 8 years to negotiate with Putin for mutual security cooperation. The idea that you can't have a negotiated settlement. It has to be fought out on the battlefield. And what does that mean? It means hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian deaths, Russian deaths. For what purpose? For NATO's effort to destroy Russia? That's the law of the jungle. Now, we're not hearing voices of reason from Western governments. Only pledges of support for the Israeli government, full support. And there are those in the Israeli government, the Netanyahu government, who favor ethnic cleansing, who call all Palestinians animals. Now, if you live in the West, and you don't think that the governments being committed to permanent war in Ukraine or Israel will have an effect on you and your freedoms, you're mistaken. Just listen to some of the language that's being used and some of what's being done in defense of this idea of an all-out war against Hamas, which takes no concern for the damage done to civilians. The Israeli major general in charge of the territories said, quote, "There will be no electricity and no water. There will only be destruction. You wanted hell, you will get hell," unquote. How does that foster an environment where there can be peace and cooperation? Biden has pledged full military support and other support for Israel, and he sent Blinken to Israel to demonstrate that support. Remember, Blinken is a protege of Madeleine Albright, who famously remarked that 500,000 Iraqi children killed by sanctions was a legitimate price to pay for getting rid of Saddam Hussein. And Blinken had the same attitude when he said that there would be no lifting of sanctions on Syria, even though children were dying after the earthquakes, so that the children were part of a collective punishment against the Assad government's unwillingness to allow Western-backed terrorists to take over the country. Then you just listen to the language from the British Home Secretary, Sue Ellen Braverman. She issued a letter instructing British authorities to arrest people who wave Palestinian flags. And she said you have to determine whether they are inciting racial hatred or not. Well, the idea that a government can stop people from waving a flag, this is where you see the so-called Leviathan, the superpower vested in the powerful who run a state without concern for justice. Now, in this Hobbesian universe, there's no way out. It's a continuous war, and we've been at permanent war, literally going back to the assassination of John Kennedy. The United States has been in one war after another. Only now, the supposedly smart people running these wars are letting other people do the dying as opposed to Americans. Now, Helga Zepp-LaRouche has proposed the idea of a higher peace movement, a higher conception based on love of mankind, based on going outside of the existing axioms, what reflects the thinking of what led to the original attempt to broker a peace between Israel and Palestinians, when Arafat and Rabin spoke of the peace of the brave and the courage to change axioms. Instead of justifying vengeance in response to the atrocities of the Hamas attack, you have to go above it. You cannot accept the idea of permanent warfare, because who benefits from permanent warfare? The victor? The people who have their foot on the neck of the oppressed? No, that just ensures permanent hatred. And who benefits? The ones who sell the weapons, the ones who run the corporate cartels that make the economic policies that say it's okay for people around the world to live under colonial conditions permanently, with no rights and no freedoms. And if you do that, you're setting the stage for the next explosion. Now, yesterday I spoke with Helga Zepp-LaRouche about this in our weekly dialogue, and I'm going to be linking that at the description page. I'd urge you to listen to the whole discussion, because we took up a number of issues, but it kept coming back to this question of the philosophical capability of human beings to rise above anger, frustration, and hatred, and actually achieve peace on the basis of reason. If we can't do that, we're condemning mankind eventually to a war not of each against all, but a war that will destroy all of us. So rather than allow this condition to continue, we, and I'm talking to our viewers, overcome your skepticism about negotiation and diplomacy. There is no other option. A military option in a time when there are vast amounts of nuclear weapons out there There's no military option for peace. Peace requires a different quality of thinking, a quality of thinking which combines the best of all religions, whether you want to call it Christian love, the idea that it's a love of one's neighbor, which is characteristic of all great religions. We have to live up to that idea as opposed to, I have a right to get my blood vengeance. Now, tomorrow's Friday. I'll be taking your questions and comments. Whether you agree or disagree with me, let me hear from you. Let's discuss this so that we can actually see if we can achieve a level of reason among the viewers of these videos. Share them, circulate them. Let's stimulate a discussion of what it means to live in a human society. So you can send me your questions and comments at harleysch@gmail.com.